Hi everyone, happy Wednesday, happy afternoon. I know we're a couple of weeks out from the end of the year, so I hope everyone's doing all right, keeping strong, keeping sane. We have hopefully an exciting and interesting conversation today. I'm really pleased to be joined by Matt Freeston. We are calling this our Trust Talks series. This is the first one. We want to know what's going on. We want to hear from trust leaders, what's on their minds at the moment. What are their challenges? What are their successes? And what can they share with the sector? So Matt is the first up. So Matt, I'm going to pass over. Can you introduce a bit about yourself and what your role is? And then we'll get into today's discussion.
Sure. I'm Matt Freeston. I'm the CEO at the Learners Trust, which operates across 3 local authorities in Rotherham, Derbyshire and Derby. My job is to try and make the whole thing work. Exciting and engaging, scares me a little bit because even though it's only Wednesday, I feel like surviving the year is the job. But yeah, I'll do my best to share all the things that have happened to us on our journey and what we think's gone wrong and what might help some of the people on the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a really interesting kind of call before we got into this session where we were discussing what is it that we want to talk about today. And you mentioned your ABC model. And we thought that was something really interesting that other people might want to hear about. So that's kind of our theme for today. Before we get into that, can you tell us a bit about the journey of the trust itself? Where have you come to? What's your vision and your values as a group of schools? That would be great if you can kind of start us off there with that context.
Yeah, I can try. I think the journey is the easy bit to describe. So we started as 3 schools in 2016, where I was an exec head, and it was back in the day where the DFE was saying, if you can convert 3 schools, we'll give you a bit more money to get you started. So we were like, let's do that and stay as 3 schools. We'll keep the cash and run for the hills. But it was also at a time where the government was kind of talking a lot about forced academisation of the sector and things like that. So we had quite a few colleagues from different local authorities phoning up and saying, your party looks all right, can we join yours? If we've got to join anyone's, we'll join yours. So before we started the trust, I took about 6 months out and just spent a lot of time looking at how the whole thing would work and whether it was going to be a kind of a free-for-all collective, a safe harbour where everybody was sheltered away from the rest of the world, or if it was an open, collaborative type thing. And look through a lot of kind of the work of David Carter and Robert Hill about all the things that worked well about trust and things that didn't, and came up with a model that was based on ratios of service. So, we knew that if we were going to provide HR, that's for 18 average size primary schools. You need a full-time HR officer, maybe a bit of admin support. IT's 1 to 6. So we just came up with a model and said, let's try and apply that model as we grow and see what happens when we get to the biggest stretch. So the biggest stretch was 18. So the target was to get to 18 average size primary schools. However that happened, we never really had a growth plan. It's more of an aspiration. Back in those days, it was a little bit more like the Wild West, so we grew really quickly. And by the end of 2019, we were at 18 schools, so we grew pretty rapidly and stood still since then. Some of our own design, some of other people telling us we can't grow, which was not a bad thing. So yeah, we're now at 18 schools. We work in 3 hubs of 6, and our ratio of services. So we've got 1 full-time school improvement partner per 6 schools. So they go into schools for like half a day a week, and then they work centrally for the trust and drive collaboration and have strategic priorities for the rest of the week. And that works pretty well for us. It's not a model that's common across the sector, I don't think, but it's kind of the other end of, if you go in once a year and do mock steads to see how the school's getting on, we go in every week in little bits and just do little audit culture and sort of collaborative picture making about the school and come to agreements of what strengths and weaknesses are. So yeah, we regularly survey the schools and how they feel about being in the trust, and today everyone's happy.
Great.
and we've had some challenges over the last few years. So one of the things about growing so quickly is you don't know what you don't know. And
Hmm.
we didn't know really about the business side of the trust as much as we did about the education side. So the role that we did have definitely outgrew our CFO. And as accounting officer, it outgrew me pretty quickly as well. So we had a notice to improve to try and make sure that all the systems and structures across the trust were in place and that we were financially viable. And we are, and we're out of that. And in fact, we're off to an award ceremony tomorrow night somewhere for CFO of the year. So, we
Oh,
kind
nice.
of smashed that one. It's like, please let us win. That'll be a really good story. But yeah, I think we've been through a lot of the mistakes and the growing pains that everybody kind of says, oh yeah, you grew too quick, but nobody really knows what it means. Well, I do now,
Yeah.
but I feel like we're on the other side of that now. We're in a fairly stable position across all the different elements of the trust. And yeah, we're here. We're still here. We're surviving.
Good. We're surviving. um, Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's really interesting. There is obviously, as you say, there was that kind of big growth spurt. There's now a kind of maybe another period of growth for many trusts and smaller ones that are maybe looking to get a bit bigger. So I think it's really interesting for people to hear, the positives and negatives, the challenges, but then you can get there at the end.
I could talk about those for ages. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of us in the CEO position, it is a gross generalization, but I think it's also mainly true that we've come from an education background.
Hmm.
And unless you are a systems and processes person, or unless you've got a systems and processes person, and we mean a real nerd about that stuff, you'll struggle when you grow, because at
Yeah.
scale, things are just so different and you very quickly lose capacity, which is, we stuck to the ratios rule and it worked really well for us. It was just the experience and quality of the people within some of those roles we needed to swap out because they kind of outgrew them. But we talk a lot of the time about kind of Peloton performance. Like, are we all doing the same thing in the same way where it's important? Nobody wants to tell a school what to do with curriculum. Nobody wants to tell a school how to run their behavior policy. But, if you are talking about, financial management, if you are talking about how buildings are looked after properly, there are certain things within most trusts where you can kind of go, no, that really needs thinking about, and it needs a system and a process to make it work. And it's just finding those people and those resources really that make that effective. And it's really boring. And most head teachers are all hearts and minds. They're not all robots. And I keep having to say to people, I do have a heart, I just don't bring it to work. I'm very much a systems and processes guy, which is helpful because I do that on behalf of everyone else in the trust. And we get there, having that balance between us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the often the benefits of being in a school trust that gets talked about, is that actually some of that pressure from the head teacher gets kind of shouldered across a group of head teachers, and then that extra support system as well. So there are real benefits there. I'd love to come in. I think we'll talk about it a little bit later on in terms of then what's the school feeling for that? How's everyone bought into it? But you spoke a lot about your different models when we previously met. You had lots of great little terms and phrases that you use. So one of them which really stuck out was ABC. So can you tell us a bit about what that is, where it came from?
So I can't find where I saw it. And it was genius when I saw it. And, somebody's going to go, oh, you've nicked that off that person. And I'm just going, yeah, I did. Yeah, that was absolutely right. But we were having lots of conversations centrally about autonomy and how we challenge schools to the next level of performance meaningfully. And, you see lots of things, systems changing for systems' sake, too aligned when you don't need to be, and all those kind of things. And we were looking for a way to kind of describe that challenge about what our purpose is as a trust in terms of supporting schools. And I came across this ABC, so it stands for ambiguity, barriers, and complexity, which kind of just encapsulated everything that we do as a trust. So I think the ambiguity part of it is schools are full. They're all wicked problems, aren't they? We live, the whole sector is a wicked problem, but they are often full of ambiguity where things aren't working too well. So, a good example of that would be things like curriculum progressions. If nobody really knows where the progression is or what it looks like, then nobody's really using it to plan lessons and then make sure that the experience the pupils have got is in line with the intended curriculum. So, we would go in and say, well, where's the ambiguity in your school? So we go in and we'd look at attendance, we'd look at behaviour, and just challenge schools to say how much better can this be? How much more clear can this be in terms of induction for staff, induction for pupils, the way the policy is known across the school. So, and that's been helpful because heads have really welcomed that, because on the other side of ambiguity is clarity. And that real sort of, we not everybody uses the same phonics scheme, but the way that we've worked with the English Hub to make sure that there's real clarity about how that's being delivered in schools. Heads are really pleased with the way that's going, and are really proud of the work that they've done. And we're like, oh, look at this unambiguous piece of work. Look how clear everything's working. Let's talk about what that means with behaviour. Let's talk about what that means with attendance policies and things like that. So that ambiguity part of it is something about the conversation between us and the school to try and find those areas for improvement. The barriers bit is where you've just got schools that have got things that need shifting, and that's our responsibility. So whether it's buildings and the roofs falling in, and it's our job to have, we shouldn't get to that stage. We should know about it, and it should be avoided. But where things go wrong and it's a barrier to progress, it just needs removing. And often schools in isolation don't have that luxury, but when you're a collaboration, that works really well. So, we've recently had a couple of examples where relatively small infant school, the head trust partner's gone in for their weekly visit, sat down with the head, known that there's been some long-term absence, but can see that the weight of it all is getting on top of leadership. So has immediately sort of hit the emergency button and said, if we don't do something, we're going to lose a head. The deputy's off long-term sick. They've just lost the year 2 teacher to another appointment. So we've got 2 ECTs in for next year. This school's got barriers to progress because it hasn't got the capacity at leadership to make the whole thing move forward. So we get to know about that, and we sit down and go, right, this is, as a trust, this is the capacity we've got to help, whether it's financial or physical, and we sort that out. So it encapsulates that kind of support part of removing any barriers. And the last bit, the complexity bit, is kind of my obsession. So it's everything should be a 3-click rule. So if you can't access it in a really quick and simplistic way, then you're probably wasting time, and that time could be better spent supporting children and connecting with families. So we are constantly looking for ways of how we can make things less complex. And there are some examples where centrally we look at what the schools are doing, and we'd say, right, how can we make that better? So curriculum progressions, going back to those, is always one that most schools you walk into and say, can I see all your curriculum progressions for all your subjects, your declarative and procedural knowledge now? I mean, we wouldn't do that, but if you went into most schools, they'd go, well, I'd just wheel a filing cabinet in, bits of paper and stuff that's everywhere. And we were looking at, and all of our schools, they did a really great job of creating their progression, but it just was complex. It was just a very difficult thing and unwieldy for staff to find really quickly. So we had a chat centrally and said, surely we can put this on a spreadsheet. And I know teachers don't like Excel generally, but we created an Excel spreadsheet which had got all of the subjects and strands. You could filter it by year group, you could filter it by subject strand or entire subject if you wanted to show, and said to everybody, right, all that work you've done, it's great. It's literally Control-C, Control-V. Spend half a day doing that and updating it, and then it's there, it's stored, it's central. Everyone's got access to a read-only copy, so it's never going to get ruined, and it's done. And funnily enough, when we started talking about it, everybody was like, what are we doing this for? And now everybody's like, it's the best thing we've ever done, because when we do medium plans, we press 3 buttons and we know exactly the things that we've got to get the children to remember in terms of retrieval. So it's just our job to try and come up with things like that where it's helpful. We try and avoid it at all costs where it's not. And I have to stop. It's knowing where that line is, because I'm like, organize everything all the same. But yeah, so I think probably the ABC thing just encapsulates all of our different roles as a trust, and has helped us think about where we go next and what's important at that moment in time. But yeah, I love it and keep talking about it. And that's how I've ended up here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love it as well. It's so simple. And I think, education is such a complicated, complex thing. Running a school is very hard. Running 18 is incredibly complicated. So wherever you can get that process and that clarity, I think is so helpful. And how have you found, you've spoken a little bit there around the reaction from the schools. How have they embraced this model? How has it changed how you maybe collaborate across the trust? Or yeah, how has that been affected by this?
It's really funny how quickly you get used to something. So obviously schools come into the trust, some of them, long-standing good schools, outstanding schools, and we're saying, yeah, all that's great. Here's the challenge. What do you think about this piece of work? And so we don't do school improvement plans. We use task management software. So it's literally available in less than 3 clicks. Your biggest priority is right at the top of the list. It's got a date. We call them a DRI, but it's got directly responsible individual. Mm-hmm. So if you want to know how you're getting on with that, if it's in your own school, you can. But it was just a really useful way of encapsulating the work that's going on across a school. And the head gets an email every day with the activity that everybody's done. We get emails every day right across the trust, and it's really interesting when you can see conversations going on, and you can connect people together to say, oh, you're talking about phonics and resourcing for home learning, and this school is using the same scheme and they've got this thing, and so you can connect people together. So yeah, I think initially people were kind of like, why do we need to change the how? We know what we're doing. So why are we talking about the how all the time? But I think in education, we all know why we're here. And loads of people go straight to the what of what they want to do. We talk, it's about what are we going to use for phonics, not how are we going to implement it. And that's the really key thing. So we've just kind of got used to that process, and schools now can see the benefit and the amount of time that's saved around progressions. We use a thing called a capacity map. So it maps out the work of a school. So when time is going to be tight and in certain places. And everybody now just uses them every day. It's the task management software is called Basecamp, and it's free, right? For schools, it's, I think, it costs us 50 quid or something a month for the whole trust. But it's well worth looking, but it's really good. But we've just found these things, and now everybody just uses them without thinking about it. And we've kind of forgotten how far we've come with those things and how comfortable everybody is, because nobody's moaning about it. They actually like it. But also, it's just part and parcel of daily life. But the real shocker is when you kind of go to another school that's not in the trust and they say, well, maybe your party's all right again. Maybe we should join and see what that looks like. But when you go and speak to them, you almost have to hold back and say, look, there are some things that we'll do using task management software, or a big risk register, which is just a color-coded list of things that will evaluate your school without you having to write loads of words. But it's such a huge gap between what I remember maintained school headship to feel and be like to where we are now, which is very much more efficient and lots more capacity in the system. So yeah, we're just on that journey now, and nobody really goes. Everybody's kind of welcoming the next thing that comes along. It's just interesting when you put that up against somebody who's not in the trust, or doesn't work in that way. There is a big gap, so we're making ourselves a bit too weird, I think, but it's fine. Well,
no, it sounds amazing. I'm sure there's lots of people who are listening and thinking, gosh, I need that kind of organization and efficiency in my life. You've spoken now, Matt, you're in a very successful place. People have embraced it. Great that they're hearing that, they're kind of ready for the next new thing. For others who maybe are listening and thinking, oh yeah, we need to change a bit more what we're doing. This sounds interesting. I'd like to implement something. What maybe are the biggest challenges you had, or what pushback did you have, and how did you kind of navigate maybe some people who are a bit slower to embrace the new model?
I think it's been iterative. So we've kind of come up against something that's either a barrier or is ambiguous across the trust. So we were all looking at curriculum, and that was an obvious place where we just looked at things. But the way that we get around that stuff is I had to go and do an MBA in executive sort of management because I didn't have a clue about my own job, and that was a terrible thing. So, but part of that, one of the modules in the MBA was very much around change management and how that can work in different contexts. So we took that change management theory and created a change management process, which you could apply to any project, but it aligns with the kind of trust, vision and values, but takes you literally through the why, the how and the what of a project. The the biggest problem we had with it is when I launched it, I thought everyone's going to hate this because it's a bit of paper that tells you how to do a job. So I called it my patronizing list of how to do a job.
Nice.
And it killed it before it got anywhere. So then I had to go back again and say, look, you're talking about how you want to improve writing in your school. Let's take it through this change management process and see the impact of using this process on the quality of the work that comes out the other end. And every single time we've used it, even the the how part of it is the best bit, because everybody goes, oh, we didn't realize that was going to happen if we did this, or we didn't, we've not really modeled it financially or whatever. But that's been really useful. So we've just tried to create a system or a process, a third party thing that takes people through the thinking. And we use that centrally when we're doing big projects. We used it when we went through Renaissance and looking at assessment. And we use that with a network of assessment leads. So we all went through that together. So it was a bit of a community decision. But schools use that in lots of different ways, whether it's about improving a subject or whether it's about, how to engage with parents. It's just a good framework for thinking. So everybody kind of trusts that process. Not everybody uses it. And when things don't go well, I go, well, did you use that patronizing list of how to do a job? Because I can see where you've gone wrong. But more and more people are adopting that, and it's working really well for us. So yeah, I think it's not about the people. The people should be really awesome, but they should run on really awesome systems and processes that create security long term for your trust and for your schools. I don't want it to be all about me. I really do. But I don't want it to be all about me, because I won't be here forever. But when I go, I want there to be a kind of a legacy of systems and processes that will just keep that security for schools working well. So, yeah, we've just tried to go down that line rather than being a force of personalities that run the trust, which is weird, I know, when it's not very hearts and minds, but it's working for us so far.
Absolutely. I think you mentioned, like longevity and sustainability is so important, particularly in education. So I think that's a really good approach to be taking. What other tips would you have for other trust leaders, people who maybe are looking at the journey you've been on? Any top tips that you can share?
Yeah, I think you need a really good conversation about how everything's going to work. So we've got a risk register, which is our self-evaluation framework for the trust. And it starts off with, have you got a clearly defined mission, vision, strategy, and culture? And even that question to most people is a challenge, because it was to us when we came back to review this. We were like, is it really? Have we been really explicit about our culture and how we're going to behave when we work with our schools? And we went back and have been through all that. So it's taking a really good look at yourself and evaluating where your particular priorities are, because there are our trust is got a lot of schools that have got high levels of deprivation. So our trust average in terms of pupil premium is kind of 40% or something. So our challenge is standards a lot of the time. Our challenges are about how we get to the best intervention and the best provision in classrooms. And it's not to say that the other schools that are in our trust that aren't in that situation don't have the same challenge, but theirs might be around something else. And it's just knowing where your particular pinch points are. So having a good look at what you think your priorities are, and then spending loads of time talking about the how. It's the system and the process that will make it secure, make it unambiguous, make it really simple. It's those kind of things that I would just spend time talking about. And we've said before, we've talked about, like I say, Peloton performances. It's something that if we don't have a meeting where somebody doesn't mention the word Peloton, we all cheer at the end of it, because everyone started off by going, oh God, he's saying it again. And now they're all using it and saying, but it's not really Peloton if we all do it this way. And so it's just about, if you're going to do something, how are you going to implement that? And how is it going to be totally clear and totally unambiguous and measurable at the end of it all, so you know that the time and energy you've spent on it is worthwhile. And I think if that happened, a lot of small trusts that are growing would avoid making the mistakes that we did make. I think and believe me, don't make them. It's not worth it. The ESFA are lovely people, but you don't want to spend that much time with them. I think you'd avoid a lot of those kind of you don't know what you don't know. The conversations bring, and as long as you've got diversity of thinking, so when you're having those conversations, bring someone else in from a different trust or a different sector who can help with that. And I know your board of trustees should do that. It's not always the case. So yeah, just that evaluation, and then thinking about the how through that ABC model would be really, really useful as a starting point. But just reach out to colleagues. I phone people up all the time and go, "What do you do about this? How does this work?" And then we take that and run it through our systems and try and create something shiny and nice.
Yeah, I love that. Collaborate. Let's all share it as much as we can. As we think about this point in the year, what are kind of your reflections on this year just gone? And have you got any big ambitions for next year? What's kind of top on your list for September?
So this year, I mean, they've all been hard recently, haven't they?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this year it's been full of distractions around teacher pay, the strikes, the well-being of the sector, and obviously all the challenges that the kids are facing with their own well-being. And year 2 was the one that went through the pandemic. So everybody's struggling with all those things, but they almost feel kind of normal now. The complexity that sits around the day job is now becoming quite normal, and I think that's been hard for us to shift our thinking on an awful lot, because a lot of the time now we're dealing with additional things that we have very little control over. And our biggest problem this year, which I'm sure anybody on any call around education would say, is the increased challenge from the kids and the lack of funding in the system for SEN and supporting those children through different services. It has just been non-existent. And we've just done budget reviews with all our schools, and everybody is over the moon with where they are in terms of their staffing structure, meeting benchmarks, and they know that they can make a stability request if something's going wrong. Every single time the request is, can I just have more money for my kids that really need it? I've got some challenging children that are not funded. So I would say this year that's been the biggest challenge for us, is just managing that situation within the resources we've got, and also trying to have a bun fight with the different local authorities we work with to try and make sure that they're stepping up to help as well. But actually, we've had a really positive year. We've come out of the NTI. We've had quite a few positive Ofsteds that have come out. Schools going from RI to good and things like that. So, I mean, that to me is just normal life, isn't it? That's how it should be. That's the job we're paid to do. But I think it's been fairly positive in the context that we've had. And our vision for next year, our big thing next year is just going back to teaching and learning and looking at that, ambiguity around what we think great teaching looks like. So each individual school's got their own view. As a trust, we've never developed a view. So we're still not sure that we want to. We're not trying to implement that view in our schools, but we want to create that underpinning system and framework which allows schools to reflect properly. So we're working a lot with teaching walkthroughs and things like that. So next year for us is very much going to be focused on how we are coaching and mentoring our teachers to higher levels of performance, and them engaging in it rather than us doing it to them.
Yeah, always a key balance, isn't it? Okay, we've got all these great systems in place, so we're trying to roll out new reading programs, whatever it might be. But how do you try and support teachers with keeping those students engaged in that learning when there is so much else going on at the moment, both for them in their home lives, I imagine, as well as in the school? Have you got any kind of tips on that student engagement side?
I think we've got we've got 18 schools. They all do that in a slightly different way. We've got some schools that are really well. They've chosen to sort of resource themselves with learning mentors, and they've done lots of work on ACEs, and their school is very much focused. Their curriculum is focused around that wellbeing agenda. So in their curriculum progressions, they've actually got a driver around wellbeing and what that looks like in reception and year 1 and year 2. So every time they plan a topic or they plan some work, that's a consideration of, well, how do we link that to mental health and wellbeing? So we've got schools that have used it as kind of a key driver for how they've resourced the schools. We've got schools that do some really interesting things around intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So one school's got, they call it tribe time, but the whole school mixes up. So from reception to year 6, instead of doing registration, you all just go and find your little tribe, and it's made up of year 6s, 5s, 4s, 6, and they talk about all sorts of different things. And they have smelly candles that are lit, so they just connect with their senses for 5 minutes, and it's just checking in with different people in different ways. So there's a number of them, and like the external one, there are some children who respond well to extrinsic motivation. So we've got virtual economies in some schools, so the children are paid for making progress. So they get the little pound notes, the little school notes, the Dracos, and they go and spend it at the school shop, which is called Brainsbury's. So we've tried to accommodate. We've definitely accommodated schools choosing their own way of doing that, but we also spend a lot of time talking and sharing through our sort of hubs of head teachers and hubs of learning mentors, of how they keep that positive. But definitely within our culture, I mean, it's based around the word choices. So it's kind of, we're all connected. We all behave in a helpful manner. We are organised. We keep everyone informed. We are candid, but compassionately so. We only focus on being effective. So we're not, moaning downwards or anything like that. And things keep simple. But that thing about helpful is the one part of our culture that we talk about more than anything else, because, if we go into a school and we feel that the atmosphere is not quite right, we go and help and we go and work out what that is. And it doesn't happen. Our schools are happy places, as 99.9% of schools are. But it's just making sure that we keep connected with the schools that we've got, and we understand the challenges they've got and help them to think carefully about that level of motivation. But yeah, there's some really nice stuff out there, but it's not the same stuff in every school. Schools have chosen their own kind of journey through that.
Really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. I love the idea of tribe time. I want to bring that back to Renaissance so we can do it across all our different teams and offices.
Really good. It's really good. Yeah.
Love it.
And it's things like that where it's easy to implement, make everyone 10% happier. So if everyone meets for 20 minutes in the morning and the job is to make the school 10% happier, then what you find is a load of kids go and making the secretary a cup of tea or going and helping clean. But they've got a dedicated time slot to go and look after the garden or to go and do these things. And there are some, it's a lovely slot in school. It's just joyous generally. It's a really nice thing. Lots of awe and wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll
send you the scheme.
Yeah, please do. I'll take it back. Thank you so much for your time today, Matt, and for all of your insights. It's been a fascinating conversation for me and hopefully for everyone else as well. I'm sure you're happy for people to kind of reach out, find you, take this conversation further.
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to.
That was brilliant. All right. Well, thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please check out the Education Joining the Dots podcast from our colleagues at GL Assessment. Thank you.